I never thought I'd be standing in that hospital room, watching the man I loved more than life itself slip away from me. My husband's hand was so cold in mine, his breath shallow, uneven. Like every second was a battle his body no longer wanted to fight. I whispered my last words to him that night, words I thought he would carry with him into the next world. Words meant to comfort him, but really, they were the only thing holding me together as my heart fell apart. I told myself I was ready, that after weeks of watching him fade, I had prepared for this moment. But there is no preparing. You can never prepare to lose the person who was your anchor, your partner, your safe place. I leaned down, kissed his forehead, and whispered goodbye. Then I turned and walked out of that room, my vision blurred with tears, my chest hollow. I thought the worst had already happened, but I was wrong. Because as I stepped into that long, sterile hallway, I heard voices, low, sharp, hurried. 2 nurses standing just ahead of me, speaking in tones that didn't sound like casual chatter. Something in their voices stopped me mid-step. At first, I told myself it was none of my business. Hospital staff had a million things to talk about, and grief was already playing tricks on my mind. But then I caught the words that made my blood run cold. They'll never say it out loud, but people like him don't get the same chances here. My breath caught in my throat. My heart hammered so loudly, I thought they would hear it echo down the hall. I stood frozen, gripping the wall to steady myself. For a moment, I thought I had misheard. My husband had worked his whole life. He was a good man. He had loved, he had cared, he had given. What could they possibly mean? But then I heard more. The words that followed cut into me like a knife. Some cases just aren't worth the fight. They know it. We know it. Better to focus resources where it makes a difference. Resources. Cases. Worth the fight. Were they talking about him? About my husband? Lying in that bed? Struggling to hold on to life? My mind screamed at me to keep walking, to pretend I hadn't heard a thing. But my feet wouldn't move. I pressed myself back against the cold wall, straining to catch every word. And what I heard next made my stomach twist. They spoke about treatments withheld, about how sometimes the decisions weren't on the charts, but in the silence between them. How some families never ask questions because they don't want the answers. My heart sank. Was this why every test had been delayed? Why every explanation from the doctors had been vague, evasive? Why hope had been dangled in front of Dion only to be ripped away again and again? A part of me wanted to scream, to run down that hall and demand the truth. But another part of me, an even louder part, was terrified. Terrified that if I spoke, if I called them out, they would bury the truth deeper. They would label me as just another grieving wife, irrational, broken, imagining things. And worst of all, terrified that they would somehow take it out on him. So I stood there in silence, shaking, my nails digging into my palms, listening until their voices faded into the distance. But the words clung to me. They wrapped around my heart and sank into my chest like poison. When I finally stepped back into his room, nothing looked the same. The machines beeped steadily. The lights cast the same dim glow. His hand was still in mine. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger than illness was happening here. That he wasn't just slipping away because of disease, but because of a choice. A choice made by people who saw him as less than, I sat there beside him, tears sliding down my cheeks, and for the first time since his diagnosis, I felt something stronger than grief. I felt rage. Quiet, suffocating rage. Rage at the thought that the man I loved might not have been given the same chance to fight as others. Rage that his worth had been measured not by his humanity, but by something else. Something far uglier. That night, I stayed by his side until exhaustion pulled me under. But even as my eyes closed, the voices of those nurses echoed in my mind. Their words replayed again and again, like a cruel reminder of what I now carried inside me. The suspicion that my husband's death wasn't just inevitable, it was orchestrated. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard their voices again. Those words, people like him don't get the same chances. It echoed in my head until it was impossible to tell if I was dreaming or awake. When the first light of morning broke through the hospital blinds, I was still in the chair beside his bed. My husband lay there, so still, so fragile, his breath shallow but steady. I wanted to believe he was being cared for, that he was still being fought for, but I couldn't shake the suspicion gnawing at my chest. The nurses came in with their clipped voices and polite smiles, checking machines, writing notes, moving around like everything was normal. But now, every gesture felt suspicious. When one of them turned off a monitor briefly, I wondered, was that necessary or just convenient? When another adjusted his IV drip, I felt my whole body tense, afraid she was taking more than she was giving. I wanted to trust them. God, I wanted to. But how could I after what I'd overheard? Every look they exchanged seemed loaded, like there was a second conversation happening in silence that I wasn't allowed to hear. The day dragged on like that, every minute stretching into hours. Family came to visit, and I plastered on the mask of a grieving wife, nodding, smiling faintly, whispering thanks for their prayers. But inside I was screaming. I couldn't tell them what I knew. What if they thought I was imagining things? What if they told the staff and it made everything worse? So I carried it alone, the secret pressing down on me until I could hardly breathe. By the afternoon, the doctors did their rounds. One of them, a man who had always seemed professional and distant, stood at the foot of the bed and gave me that practiced look of sympathy. He spoke in vague terms. The illness has progressed. Options are limited. We're doing everything we can. But I heard the lies between the words. Everything we can? No, that wasn't what I heard in the hallway. That wasn't what they whispered when they thought no one was listening. I wanted to grab him by his white coat, shake him, scream, tell me the truth. Tell me why my husband isn't worth saving. But instead, I nodded, biting down hard enough on my tongue to taste blood, because I knew they had the power, not me. And if I made the wrong move, my husband would pay the price. That night, as I sat by his bed again, the rage inside me grew sharper. I kept remembering moments from before his illness, how he would come home after long days, still smiling, still full of stories, how he would mow the lawn for the elderly neighbor, or spend hours fixing someone's car when they couldn't afford a mechanic. He was the kind of man who gave without expecting anything back. And yet here he was, fighting for his last breath, while the people in charge of saving him decided he wasn't worth the effort. It was more than grief, it was injustice. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just about him. This wasn't just one man being ignored. It was bigger. I remembered the families in our neighborhood who had left without warning. Families who looked like us, who spoke like us, who had quietly packed up in the night and disappeared. I used to wonder why. I told myself it was jobs, or money, or just life pulling people elsewhere. But what if it was more? What if what I was hearing now, the whispers, the quiet discrimination, had been happening all along, right under my nose? The thought made me sick. Late that night, as the machines beeped steadily and my husband slept in his icy, shallow way, I slipped out into the hallway again. I told myself I was just going to stretch my legs, get some air. But really, I wanted answers. I walked quietly past the nurse's station, ears straining for any words that might slip. Most of what I heard was ordinary: charts, schedules, medications. But then I caught one of them sigh and mutter under her breath, "It's always the same cases. You know how it goes." The other one didn't respond. She just gave a look I'll never forget. Tired, resigned, but certain. Like this was normal, like this was accepted, like this was just the way things worked. And that was when the fear truly settled in. Because if this wasn't just about my husband, if this was a pattern, then I was staring at something much bigger than my own grief. Something that reached far beyond this one hospital room, far beyond my family. I wanted to walk away, to pretend I hadn't heard, to hold on to the small comfort that maybe, just maybe, he was still being given a fair fight. But deep down, I knew. I knew the truth was darker than that. I returned to his bedside with my chest heavy, my hands shaking. I sat in that chair, staring at his face, memorizing every line and every shadow, knowing I was losing him. And as I held his hand, one thought refused to leave me. If they could decide his life wasn't worth saving, what did that mean for the rest of us? The beeping of the machines filled the silence, steady, relentless. Each sound felt like a countdown, and I couldn't help but wonder, how much time did he really have left? And worse, how much of that time had already been stolen by the people who were supposed to protect him? That night, I didn't just grieve. I began to fear. Fear for him, fear for myself. Fear for every family who had ever trusted this place to save their loved ones. And I knew, as the hours dragged by, that the worst was yet to come. The hours crept by like shadows, long and heavy, and by the next evening I was exhausted, mentally, physically, and in ways I didn't even have words for. My body was there in the chair beside his bed, Chijita, but my mind was restless, spinning between grief, suspicion, and the gnawing terror that I was about to lose him in more ways than one. I held his hand as his chest rose and fell, shallow and fragile. Every breath felt like it might be the last. The hum of the machines was the only rhythm in that cold room, and I tried to match my breathing to his, as if maybe, just maybe, I could help him hold on a little longer. Then it happened. The alarm. That shrill, piercing sound that ripped through the room like a scream. My heart stopped. I looked at him, his chest faltering, his lips pale, and in an instant, the door burst open. Nurses rushed in, followed by a doctor. They crowded around him, their voices sharp, clipped. "Vitals dropping? Prepare." I was shoved back against the wall, helpless, my body shaking. I wanted to scream at the men, to beg them to save him, but the words stuck in my throat. My eyes darted from one face to another, searching for urgency, searching for hope. But what I saw instead froze my blood. Hesitation. It was small, subtle, but I saw it. A nurse looked to the doctor, eyes flickering with something unspoken. He met her gaze, and for a fraction of a second, he paused. Just enough for me to know. Just enough for me to feel the floor tilt under me. "No," I whispered, my voice trembling. Please do something." But they didn't look at me. They looked at each other, they moved their hands, adjusted machines, barked orders. But slower than they should have. I had seen resuscitations before, on television, in movies. I knew what desperation looked like when life was slipping a kitchen duds. Wayne! And this wasn't it. Every second stretched into eternity. His chest rose once, then fell. The monitor screamed, the line flattening into a single, endless tone. My knees buckled and I clutched the edge of the wall, unable to breathe. "Call it," the doctor said quietly, too easily. I stumbled forward, my hands outstretched. No, you can't just..." But it was already done. One nurse shut off the monitor. Another pulled the blanket up over his chest. Their faces were unreadable, their voices silent now. And just like that, the man I loved was gone. I pressed my hands against his chest, desperate to feel even the faintest beat, the smallest rhythm that might prove them wrong. But there was nothing. Only stillness. Only silence. And then I saw it. The look. A glance exchanged between two of the nurses. Quick but unmistakable. A look of finality. Of certainty. A look that told me what I had feared all along. That this wasn't just illness. This was choice. Tears blurred my vision. Hot and unstoppable. My sobs echoed in the room. But they didn't comfort me. They burned. My grief was tangled with rage. A rage that made my whole body shake. He had been my anchor. My protector. My safe place. And now, he had been taken from me not only by disease, but by something crueler. Indifference, prejudice, justice. I collapsed into the chair, clutching his lifeless hand, my body trembling as I tried to process the unthinkable. The doctors and nurses slipped out quietly, leaving me in that sterile room with the weight of everything I had just witnessed. The flat line still echoed in my head, louder than any scream, louder than my own sobs. And in that moment, something inside me broke, and something else came alive, because I realized this wasn't just about my husband anymore. It wasn't just about my loss. It was about every whispered conversation, every family that had vanished from our block, every time someone like him was deemed not worth the effort. It was about a system that had decided, long before that night, who was worth saving and who was not. I thought I had been saying goodbye, but really, I had been standing witness to a theft. And now I was left with the most unbearable question of my life. What do I do with the truth I now carry? The room felt like a tomb after they left. The hum of the machines was gone. The steady beep that had once reassured me, gone. Just silence. The kind of silence that pressed against my ears, heavy, suffocating, as though the world itself had closed in around me. I sat there, my hands still wrapped around his, even though it was cold now. Too cold. I traced the lines of his fingers, the ones I'd held 1,000 times before. When we walked together, when we laughed, when he comforted me after long days. They looked the same, but they weren't alive anymore. And no matter how tightly I clung to him, nothing was going to change that. The tears came in waves, hard and unrelenting, until my face burned and my throat ached. But underneath the grief, something darker stirred. Rage. A kind of fury I'd never known before, because I couldn't shake what I'd seen. The hesitation, the exchanged glances, the way their movements slowed instead of quickened. It was like they had decided, long before his last breath, that he didn't deserve to keep breathing. I replayed every second in my head, over and over, like a broken record. The alarm, the pause, the doctor's quiet words, call it. He said it like it was nothing. Like my husband's life was just another case to close, another bed to free up. And I knew why. Deep down, I knew. Because to them, he wasn't just a man, he wasn't just my husband. He was something else. Someone they judged before he even opened his eyes, before he even had a chance. Maybe it was the color of his skin. Maybe it was the name on his chart. Maybe it was the quiet prejudice they carried, the kind that hides in plain sight, behind polite smiles and practiced professionalism. But whatever it was, it had cost him his life. That thought was unbearable, because it meant his death wasn't just an accident. It was a decision. Remember standing up, my legs shaky, my body weak, and walking out of that room for the last time. The hallway seemed endless, sterile, every step echoing like I was walking through a tunnel. People passed me, busy with their lives, their routines, their jobs. No one looked at me. No one saw the storm raging inside me. To them, I was just another grieving woman, just another statistic in a place full of them. But I wasn't. Not anymore. At home, the silence followed me. The bed felt too big, the house too empty. Every corner held his memory, his laughter, his voice, the smell of his cologne. I wanted to collapse, to disappear into the grief and never come back out. But the truth wouldn't let me. It gnawed at me, relentless, demanding to be faced. I thought about the families before us, the neighbors who left in the middle of the night, the quiet farewells, the unanswered questions. I used to tell myself it was coincidence, that life simply moved people on. But now I saw the pattern for what it was. Deliberate, cruel, undeniable. And I thought about the future. How many more? How many more husbands, wives, brothers, sisters would have to be lost before someone listened? Before someone cared enough to fight back? I sat at the kitchen table with his letter, the one he'd left for me, spread open in front of me. His words still burned in my mind. Words of love, but also words of duty, words of warning, words I hadn't wanted to believe. I ran my fingers over the ink, over the sentences he had written with such care. My heart ached for him, for the man I had loved, for the years we shed. But it also ached with betrayal, because those same words carried shadows I couldn't ignore anymore. Maybe he had been part of it. Maybe he had known more than he ever told me. Maybe he had been tangled in something bigger, something darker, something I was only just beginning to uncover. And now, whether I liked it or not, I was tangled in it too. The truth weighed heavy in my chest, pressing harder with every breath. To keep it hidden would mean silence. Erasing what happened, erasing him, erasing the pain of all the others who had been taken before. But to speak it, to share it, would mean tearing open wounds I wasn't sure I had the strength to face. It would mean painting a target on my own back. But here's what I couldn't escape. I had already been chosen. By circumstance, by love, by loss. His death had dragged me into this whether I wanted it or not. And as much as it terrified me, I knew I couldn't stay silent. Because this wasn't just one story. It wasn't just my story. It was the story of millions. A story that keeps repeating. In hospitals, in streets, in neighborhoods just like mine. The question that haunts me, the one that keeps me awake at night, staring into the dark, isn't about what happened. I know what happened. I lived it. The question is, what am I going to do with it? And maybe, just maybe, the real question is, what are you going to do now that you've heard it? The days after the funeral were a blur, as if the world had gone grey. People came with casseroles, with handshakes and hugs, with those rehearsed words everyone says when they don't know what else to do. I'm so sorry for your loss. They meant well, but they didn't know. They couldn't. Because how could I tell them the truth? That my husband's death wasn't just about illness, or time, or fate. That the very place meant to heal him had quietly decided he wasn't worth saving. How could I say it out loud without sounding like a woman drowning in grief, desperate for someone to blame? So, I stayed quiet. On the outside, I played the part of the grieving widow. I accepted the flowers, the cards, the whispered prayers. But inside, I was unraveling. At night, I sat alone at the kitchen table with that metal box in front of me. The letter, the photos, the documents, evidence of something larger, something organized, something that stretched beyond my husband's last breath. Every time I opened it, my stomach turned. I could hear his voice in my head, urging me, warning me, pleading with me. And every time I closed it, I felt the weight of my silence pressing down harder. One night, I couldn't bear it anymore. I spread the papers out across the table, covering every inch of it. Names, addresses, dates, records he had kept, as if he wanted someone, me, to see it all. And then I realized, maybe he hadn't been leaving me a confession. Maybe he had been leaving me instructions. I thought about the nurses' voices in the hallway that night, the way they had spoken with such coldness, as if my husband's death was routine. I thought about the neighbors who disappeared, the families who never said goodbye. It all connected. It all pointed to the same truth. This wasn't just about him. It was about all of us. My hands shook as I gathered everything back into the box. Fear whispered in my ear. If you speak, they'll come for you too. If you dig too deep, you'll vanish just like the others. But another voice pushed through, louder, steadier. If you stay silent, nothing will ever change. So I made a choice. The next morning, I walked into a community center downtown. The kind of place where people gather when they're desperate for answers, for justice, for someone to finally listen. I carried the box like it was part of me, heavy but necessary. When I laid it on the table, eyes turned toward me, curious, cautious. I opened my mouth, and for the first time, I told the truth. I told them about the hospital, about the hesitation, about the look in the doctor's eyes when he called the time. I told them about the letter, about the records, about the neighbors who were gone. My voice trembled at first, but the more I spoke, the more it steadied, because I wasn't just speaking for myself anymore. I was speaking for him, for them, for all of us. By the time I finished, the room was silent. Not the heavy, suffocating silence of loss, but the kind of silence that comes when people are holding their breath, waiting for what comes next. That was the beginning. Soon, others began to speak too. Stories poured out, each one different, but each one the same. A father who never came home from a traffic stop. A sister who vanished after complaining about her landlord. A mother who died waiting for care that she should have received. Every story was another thread, weaving into the same dark pattern. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't alone. The movement grew quietly at first. Meetings in church basements, whispers exchanged on street corners, names written down so they would not be forgotten. But with every story shared, with every truth spoken aloud, the silence that had once protected the powerful began to crack. Still, fear never left me. Every night, I checked the locks twice. Every shadow outside my window made my heart race. I knew there were people who wanted these secrets buried, who wanted me silent, but I also knew that silence had already stolen too much from me, from us. My husband's death changed me. It tore me apart, yes, but it also rebuilt me into someone who couldn't look away anymore. Someone who couldn't just move on, as though his life and the lives of so many others didn't matter. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear his voice. Not the voice from his letter, but the voice I knew. The voice that laughed with me, comforted me, loved me. I like to believe he would be proud of me now, that he would see what his death uncovered, what it forced into the light. But the truth is, pride doesn't matter. Justice does. And so I keep going. I keep speaking. I keep carrying that box, not because it holds his secrets, but because it holds the stories of all the others who cannot tell them themselves. This is bigger than me, bigger than him, bigger than any single family. This is about the world we live in, the one we choose to accept, or the one we choose to change. So I'll ask you the same question I ask myself every single day, son. Yai. How many more lives must be lost in silence before enough is finally enough? Because this isn't just my story. This isn't just his story. This is our story. And the ending hasn't been written yet.